Hello, and thank you very much for having me here. I was asked today to speak about the integrated and unified laboratory getting started today. I thought about that title, and I thought about where we need to be talking, and I thought that if we're still thinking about laboratories as separate entities, as silos, if you will, rather than thinking about our data and our activities within an organization and across an organization, then we're setting ourselves up for problems. A little bit about how I want to talk through today. We'll talk about the problem, which is discord. We'll talk about some approaches to that problem that we're able to help customers and help organizations with. We'll talk about some of the details about how we get into that, and some stories for customer success and some other places to learn about this and to be studying it in greater detail. When we think about the end result of poor data management and poor organizational practices, we think the most chaotic and problematic is the recall. Product recalls are incredibly expensive, something like 10 million a pop in foods, much more in drugs. And they're terrible for your company's reputation, and they're terrible for everything that's happening within the organization. This is just a quick analysis, the first page of a recent analysis. And there's all sorts of reasons, mislabeling or improper characterization or poor cleavage to that central specification that an organization went to so much effort to put in place. All of these are actually problems about organizational practice and data practice, moving information about what is supposed to be done through the organization and then retrieving that data and sharing it to the appropriate entities. I thought about the problem, though, of the recall, and that's too far down the line. The problems with discord in data are problems of wasted time and effort within an organization. And I've been in organizations that are responding to audits, and it's chaotic and difficult, and we spend a lot of time working through that. But even worse, what we're not doing when we're responding to problems about data moving through the organization properly is we're not innovating. We're not doing the things that move our organization forward, and frankly, we're not having fun. And in California, we like to have fun in the laboratory. We heard, I think it was Eric talking earlier today about silos and data silos. And I think we were told to embrace the silo. It's an interesting perspective. I think we should acknowledge the silo. The joke would be that I grew up visiting farms in Iowa fairly often, and silos are large and difficult things to embrace. But truthfully, those silos do exist for a reason, and so we need to acknowledge them. Organizations have grown up within organizations, and so they've implemented different tools, they've implemented different procedures and processes, and that has resulted in restriction of information and data. And so what happens to the organization when those silos are allowed to exist and we don't have the proper tools and proper methods of integrating that data are those problems, that organizational discord. And there's a lot of approaches to what's going on here, and I think we've had some very successful approaches that we've been able to succeed with, help customers to succeed with. When we think about where we need to be helping organizations succeed, it's throughout the organization, and we need to be thinking about what regulatory agencies are thinking, the views that they need to have into your data, what your quality organization is going to be doing, how they're reaching through into other parts of the organization, into the PLM system for specification, how that specification is going to be modified as it's applied around the world, back all the way to the research lab where the fundamental activity is occurring that builds the company value, and where the methods are built that assure quality in whatever is delivered downstream to the customer and to the rest of the world. The solution that we're providing in this area, the heart of this solution that I want to talk about that's focused in the laboratory, is one lab. We have values about One Lab and that help us to deliver to organizations, and those values are built on working with customers. And for many of us who've grown up in this science-based organization, it's values that were built from working in the lab and from trying to deliver things. We go all the way back to discovery and target identification and what it is to think about something that's supposed to be coming to market. We work with our partners who are doing things like lead identification and thinking about a consortium of ways to build small molecules and build new solutions to druggable problems. We think about issues working with people in development labs who are focusing on risk assessment and the ways to prevent problems going through. We think a lot these days about CMC preparation. We think about the delivery of ECTDs and certificates of analysis, what it means to document the achievements that you've done in the laboratory and make that information accessible to the organization so that it can be delivered and consumed and viewed and used for decision makings. We have a view in laboratory management of a unified integrated laboratory. And we think about this in data in a lot of ways. We want to have a system that accommodates your methodologies, the recipes that you're going to need to be executing, and externally can tie those directly back up to specification, allows the organization of those methods, but also ties back to the people and the processes who are going to be executing them. It was interesting to hear about this one combined process that was discussed here with SAP. We find that many of the organizations we're working with are reaching out to external systems. They're going to Maximo or something else for doing their equipment management. We need to be able to integrate with those systems, help organizations to integrate with those systems in order to be able to handle things like metrology and deliver that information back in. In terms of where the rubber meets the road and what's nearest to my heart in terms of the execution of processes in the laboratory, we're providing very good systems, and we've got a long history in that area, and we'll go into more detail about that as we go forward here. In terms of reporting, there's been an incredible growth in terms of the reporting capabilities that are expected coming out of the laboratory. Beyond Excel spreadsheets and Word documents, beyond views into databases and queries, into business objects and trainable processes, into the application of machine learning to be able to look into data and to let subject matter experts help with the assistance of training of machine learning processes so that time can be saved when it comes time for that ECTD, when it comes time to deal with that audit. And then to cycle back the information that comes from all that to be able to plan and manage the application of resources within the laboratory. The problem of laboratory management is also a lot greater than what I recall when I was in the lab and I was focused on primarily on discover and simpler problems. The problem grows to be able to define stability studies and define the resource application years in advance, and make sure that you're going to have the equipment, the instrumentation, the personnel, the training records, the metrology all lined up so that you'll know you'll be able to deliver for your organization, for regulatory authorities, for your shareholders, for your customers down the line. None of this is done effectively without the application of industry best practices. Because we're pushing data all the way, and data and practices all the way from the research lab through development up to manufacturing, we need to accept standards that are support all the way along that line, including S88 and 95. Application of generalized methods like the USP. And we also we've been working in partnership with Allotrope in order to make sure that those standards carry into all of the data that organizations are able to be preserving and moving forward with. And Allotrope has been a great partner in helping to get industry to recognize the critical responsibilities there are around data standardization, the value of connectivity within data, and understanding the depth of problems in ontology and semantic tagging, which it's great. It's great to be part of an organization, Dassault Systems, that has such a long-term record in that area, but then also be working with external organizations that are coming to understand the values that are there. So what does one lab really provide? One lab, it looks like I messed up a font or two here. One lab is addressing the issues all the way across what it takes to succeed in running a laboratory and delivering the information out of a laboratory that's required, but then also to be planning around that and to be feeding into that. So we think about data management, which we've been talking a lot about, especially pesky areas like reference data. Reference data is complex to work with, and there's a lot of different solutions that are being applied for appropriate reference data management. Without appropriate management in this area, you're destined to waste a lot of time again. And we have internal systems for all this, but we're also reaching out to external systems like TopBraid, depending on what an organizational legacy is. In terms of materials management, without understanding the nature of the materials that are going into a lab, it's impossible to be planning appropriately. And without proper characterization of those materials, you're destined for failure, as we mentioned with the issues of recalls. Sampling also we'll come back to. The questions about building data models that appropriately work with all sorts of sampling plans, all sorts of sample management, including destructive and non-destructive sampling, is non-trivial, as I'm sure that a lot of you have faced as you've made that paper to digital transition. We've talked a little bit about scheduling. We've got great corporate partners here internally within Dassault in terms of ORTEMS and the experience of managing complex scheduling and resource management issues. And then the issue of life cycle management, where organizations need to understand properly for every element within their data system what approval processes are, how to monitor those, how to retire things like methods, or even the parameter templates that are being called upon by methods needs to be managed. I wasn't going to lay this slide in here, but I did. And I like the thought behind it. We think back to Lost in Space, and we think about what it was to have that friendly robot along who was helping out in guiding these poor humans through difficult and alien circumstances. And I think in our best case, when we're succeeding well, we want systems within our organizations that will also provide us this sort of help, this sort of guidance, and help marshal us through the stormy waters of data discord. And that's what we're achieving these days. So it's a fun way to look at systems that are they're providing protection and in a sort of friendly way guiding us through what we need to get done. Laboratory data capture is the first element in that. We have systems that are going to that guide any user in associating metrology information with the required steps for any sort of equipment and procedure execution. The results from any data are automatically included with appropriate experiments, and the data transfer is managed entirely automatically. There's a variety of different complexities around that, depending upon whether we're working with instrumentation that's tied into database systems such as Chromeleon or Empower versus directly connected or simply network-based data sources. It's been fun over the years to see what the options are as we've been working from older systems and to get into these newer, highly automated systems, although the complexities about describing those systems properly in order to properly tag the data and associate to them information will be coming up to shortly. Equipment needs to be managed properly in order to be understood by the user and to be understood by the system. The registry that we've built in our Foundation Hub in order to accommodate every element about equipment that's necessary, including location, authorized users, metrology that's being undergone, and appropriate logging of activities, means that we have traceability of information related to every data point about every sample back to every element of the equipment or the instrumentation that's being applied. Doing this properly means that we have to define exactly what the taxonomy and the ontology are for every element of the readings coming off of that equipment. We've been able to work with partners previously to achieve better and better results about this. The difficulty in the past has been, I think, that a lot of organizations, when defining where their data goes and where their data derives, don't put the time and effort into describing those processes at that ontology level. And again, thanks partly to allotrope, this is becoming less of an industry problem, and I think most companies are working to come forward on this and move forward. If you look at the model we have for that data and how we're able to move effectively through equipment and instrument data, it's at 3 levels. We've got the equipment class, which defines the superset of data readings that are going to be available from any general classification of equipment. We think about gas chromatography. The example that's just come out of allotrope is LCUV, so basic chromatography. Then we can go into equipment types. Equipment types allow the person who is designing an experiment or designing a set of experiments to determine exactly what the available subclass is of readings that are going to be achievable in order to define an experimental outcome, and to simplify the association of whatever taxonomy is defined around those outcomes from the instrument into the system and the ontology defined within the system. And then we get down to the instance. It's not possible to actually collect data without the specific instrument involved, know where it is, know exactly whether it's calibrated or has been properly maintained. So when we come back then to the mappings and the ontology around the instrumental data, we think at one level about the equipment vendor and the equipment type. We think about the specifics of the equipment data format, how that can be delivered out to the organization in order to answer experimental need. We couple that through a measurement ontology into the vocabularies that are provided within one lab. So it's fairly simple and straightforward once the data models are described. And again, this has been done in conjunction with our partners. The result is that the actual acquisition of data is somewhat seamless. The readings are easily defined for the user. The user isn't, and the organization isn't left wondering what data is just because it's sitting out there in a data lake somewhere. It's associated with a specific requirement for an experimental outcome. That data isn't useful without appropriate routing, especially the kind of pre-processing that's necessary to derive value from whatever experimental outcome. I think a lot about what it is to look at a chromatogram or look at an NMR spectrum. It's scientifically interesting, and I still enjoy getting back into doing that sort of data analysis and interpretation. But the result that's delivered to the ECTD later on is going to require that there's some sort of processing that has occurred and that there's a result associated with that data. That's done appropriately through the right kinds of pre-processing, dumping the data into a measurement hub, and then you can choose whatever store you want. We do like data lakes, and we're finding that our customers are succeeding with data lakes. And then feeding back into the ELN and associating the appropriate metrology or IoT measures to understand the environment around the equipment. Materials management is also obviously absolutely required. We provide a very full-featured set of materials capabilities through our partners at CISPRO. In terms of what the actual definitions of all elements around the materials, things like expiry dates and the ancestry of any material. The logistics about how to move those materials around, including proper labeling and barcoding. I used to think that's too simple to talk about, but the problem is that where the rubber meets the road of getting the right label onto the right material and having a barcode that's readable and the right size, that ends up being the only way to succeed. It's great to have high-level view of things, but if your printer doesn't work, you still can't get work done in the lab. Yeah, regulatory associations in terms of things like expiry dates or whatever the associations are to specification, and container definition. In terms of building methods and then being able to move those methods through an organization, we support the standards that talk about general site, master, and control recipes. This is important because it means that we support easy tech transfer and generalization from methods that are developed in one lab but then need to be moved into any laboratory around the world, which could be using different equipment or different specific action steps within a method. And that's obviously necessary. It's great to have one global spec, but when you, especially in things like consumer packaged goods, the application of those specifications can actually be substantially different depending upon where in the organization we are. The organization is able to modify substantially what we're providing with one lab. We provide vocabularies and ontologies to work with, but there's a lot of room for growth in those areas or for customization. We provide all of the abilities necessary to build appropriate methods, especially to build reusable elements within those methods when we think about process elements there. We support mobility. We're waiting for the actual mobile revolution to occur in the laboratory. I'd be interested in speaking with any of you to find out what's happening with mobility in your labs. We've waited for this wave to really crest, and we're seeing somewhat more, but we're still seeing a lot of people going back to their laptops or their desktops to really be doing work. Nonetheless, we use web services in order to be able to create mobile supportable activities, and we test everything on mobile whenever we're building it. Data always has to be reviewed, and we provide, I'm almost out of time, so I'll move quickly. We provide easy ways to get through a lot of data by allowing review by exception or reviewed by specific characteristics. We think a lot about samples because, again, the management of specific samples and sampling activities ends up being a bugaboo, which needs to account for a large variety of issues about how the samples are moved, how they're labeled, whether they're destroyed or reused, whether multiple experiments are occurring on the same sample, and then associating all of the appropriate data and being able to apply specific and appropriate life cycle considerations to that sample. I look here at a certificate of analysis workflow. This could be mimicked also with what it is to get all of the appropriate data into a CMC document or it could be multiplied to accomplish that. We think about reaching out to external LIMS or doing a lot of that work internally. We also think about reaching out to PLM systems in order to define the appropriate specification and tie the appropriate method to that. This delivers an integrated workflow. The capabilities that we have are extended vastly by working with our DASO partners. We especially have been enthusiastic about working with our partners in Exelead for overall ability to search and to extend our ability to search into our data. We're working with Delmia for advanced scheduling capabilities and the ability to reach out deeper into manufacturing. Enovia for PLM, and then across BIOVIA for all of our other capabilities. There's good examples here in terms of being able to work at pharmaceutical companies who are doing integrated work. They're using their ELN, but tying it back into our capabilities. They see, substantial reduction in there we go. I don't know what happened here. All right, reduction in review times especially, but also the error reduction for moving through processes that had still been on paper beforehand, and then the overall just moving paper around. In terms of working with consumer packaged good partners, we've seen especially the reduction in the amount of testing required because of the close ties to specification and the globalization of testing. And then we've had great success that's been presented externally as well, and you'll probably hear of at other conferences with a global biopharma company in terms of being able to create an integrated environment that is supporting pharmaceutical development globally and is tying together all of these elements throughout the laboratory and between laboratories, between many different countries, and reaching out to manufacturing in order to support improved compliance and improved consistency across their processes. Good places to learn about this coming up. We'll be having a set of user meetings that are being presented globally. Coming up in the coming months, you can find more information at our website. And we're also going to be hosting the Allotrope meeting at our headquarters campus in Velisi in just a few weeks. We're enthused to be able to host this group that's working on data standardization and is creating a lot of positive impact in terms of what we can be delivering to the laboratory. Thank you.
Thank you very much.